Okay, so this webinar presentation will be done by the Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations, our colleague Nathan Water, who is going to explain to us how to exploit the datasets. So before we start, I'm going to very briefly explain the, wait, sorry. 1 second. Okay, now it works. Okay, sorry. So before everything, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Inmaculada Farfán Velasco, and I'm working in the EU Open Data Portal in the Publications Office of the European Union. And I'm going to briefly explain to you what you need to know if you're interested in this competition. And then I will give the floor to Nathan to start explaining the data sets that you can exploit for this competition. So as you can see on the tagline, the idea is like innovating for Europe with EU open data. So it's the 4th edition of this competition, and there are so many benefits out of it. So the first one is that you can show your creativity and your talent by demonstrating the potential of open data. You also help Europe achieve important goals set by the European Commission by different challenges that I will explain afterwards. And then you also can claim your share of the total prize found amounting to 100,000 euros. So now that I got a little bit your attention, in case you are interested in participating, how can you participate? So this is a worldwide competition, so anyone can submit their proposals. The teams can be up to 4 people, and you can register your proposal for every challenge you think is suitable for, or even for all of them. But it's very important that there are not several proposals for the same thing in each challenge. So as I was saying before, you help Europe to address different challenges. So we have 4 challenges here. The first challenge is the European Green Deal. The second one, an economy that works for people. The third one, a new push for European democracy. And the 4th challenge is a Europe fit for the digital age. So we launched the competition the 19th of February. So now, in case you're interested, you have to submit your proposal before the 3rd of May, because it's the deadline to submit your ideas. And then I will have like a kind of a process. So you will be communicated if you are shortlisted, and you will be invited to develop a proposal, your ideas. And then you will have the opportunity to present your application in the 18th European Week of Regions and Cities in Brussels. That is an event that hosts more than 9,000 people every year. So the idea is that you will be able to show the results of your work to all these the people in this week. So you will have your own stand with your team during the 13th and the 14th, where you're going to be able to network, to show what you've been working on, and so on. And then on the 15th, it will be the final competition. So what are the prizes? So the final ranking of the winning teams for each challenge will be decided at this event on the 15th, and the teams will be awarded with the following prizes for each challenge. So the first prize will be 12,000 euros, the second one 8,000 euros, and the third place it will be 5,000 euros. So then again, if you want to participate in this challenging competition that makes the best out of the open data, please don't forget to submit your proposal before the 3rd of May. So now, what is the purpose of this webinar? So this webinar is organized to help the participants to better understand the data from the data providers, in this case, for the Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations, to know how it can fit in the challenges and where to find this very valuable information. So, of course, for more information, you can go to the rules of the competition on our website. And then, of course, you can follow us through our social media to get to know everything that is going on. So you can follow us on Twitter with these hashtags to be informed about everything that is happening. And also, of course, we're here to support you and help you in anything we can. So please send us any questions you may have about the competition to our functional mailbox. So I'm going to show you very quickly the websites before giving the floor to my colleague. Okay, so then this is the website, as you can see here. So you have all the information you may need. like the different webinars we have, what is it about, the challenges, prices, and basically some testimonials about the competition. And of course, the partners here. And then, of course, impressions from previous years. And what it can be very interesting for you is that here you have the rules of the competition. You have also the promotion material, and then the webinars in case you missed any webinar, or you can just check it out here. Okay, it's charging now. Oops. Okay, the connection is not working very well. Okay, so for this webinar will be recorded and it will be uploaded to this site, and then we will promote it, and you will be able to see it as many times as you want with the presentation. Okay. So having said this, I give the floor to Nathan, who's going to present for the Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations. So you can start whenever you want. And before that, I was going to say that if you have any questions, please, you can go through our chat box. Please write whatever question you may have. And then after his presentation, I will place them these questions. So, okay. You can start whenever you want. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction. Again, my name is Nathan Warner. I'm from the Environmental Statistics team here at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. I'm very happy to be participating in this year's Datathon. I think it was also a success last year, which was my first year participating. The winners for the challenge Tackling Climate Change were from the Chloe Irrigation Systems platform. And they had a platform which optimizes irrigation to reduce water waste and cost while increasing crop yield, which used some of our FAOSTAT data. So I was also happy to, in addition to participating with giving the webinars, actually see how our data could be used in one of the platforms. So what I'm first going to do is I'm from the environmental statistics team, and although our data sets are applicable to, I think, all of the challenges, they may be more applicable to some than others. So I'll be more specifically talking about environmental statistics, but then I will also give you an overall view of the FAOSTAT website, where you can see other statistics domains that are relevant for mostly agriculture, being my organization is the Food and Agriculture Organization. So here's, and I'll talk firstly about our core environmental statistics, which are land use, pesticides, and fertilizers. And then we also have some other domains which are more analytical, let's say, which are the agri-environmental indicators. Then I'd like to spend a bit more time on some work that we've been doing, which may be more applicable to the Datathon, which is we've created some different indicators, and I mean, for across the different domains for measuring what progress towards sustainable agriculture. So this is a publication that's being submitted for external peer review. And for this report, we developed a number of indicators across our statistics domains to touch different dimensions of sustainable agriculture. And in addition, I'll also show you a brief overview of all the other FAOSTAT domains when we look at the actual FAOSTAT website. So focusing more on the environmental statistics for the core environmental statistics, just to give you an overview of how, so our data is collected through annual questionnaires, and these are usually from national statistical offices or Ministry of Agriculture or some other governmental source. We collect this data, analyze it, and disseminate it to support evidence-based decision-making, and also other initiatives such as this. So one of our core domains is on land use, which dates from 1961 all the way to the present. It's one of our more widely used domains because...
Nathan, sorry,
yeah?
were you planning to share your screen?
Yes, you can't see it.
No.
Did I forget to do that? Okay, so let me go here.
Doesn't work now.
Give me 1 minute, please.
Nathan, what happens if you click on share screen?
Okay, so... Okay.
Now it works. Wait.
Okay.
Yes, now it works. Thank you very much.
Okay, so you didn't miss any content because I was just getting to, let's say, the first slide that had any details to it. So let me go here. And so, as I was saying, one of our core domains is the land use domain, for which is quite widely used because it dates all the way back to 1961. And it contains some of the core information in terms of land use, such as one of the main denominators that are used in many indicators would be agricultural area or cropland area. And it also includes information regarding irrigation. Then we have some other core statistics domains, which are fertilizers and pesticides use. So the fertilizers use dates back from 2002, yes, and the pesticides use dates back all the way to 1990. And in addition to in our land use domain, we also have information on forest area. And these different data sets are aligned with some other international processes, such as the System for Economic and Environmental Accounting. And there on the left side of this screen, you can see how the FAOSTAT website is structured, including how you can download the bulk downloads for the different data sets, which I'll have a closer look at later in the presentation. So when we're developing our analytical environmental statistics, what we try to do is we try and put out a reference global product that mainly relies on default parameters, okay? So a lot of other statistics will be developed using more refined parameters, but what we are focusing on is comparison across countries and over time, for which our data sets can often be used as a baseline for other more refined methodologies in which you can compare to our baseline default parameters for our analytical statistics and do some comparisons to see how different methodologies can be used, compared to them. So our reference level is a default core data set at the country level with country-specific data, which can then be used to feed into more refined models that look at subnational data and modeling techniques. These reference data are already used and have applicability with the Sustainable Development Goals. We use the IPCC guidelines to feed into our default statistics for greenhouse gas emissions, for example, which I will go into more detail in a little bit. So one of our domains in FAOSTAT for the environmental statistics are greenhouse gas emission statistics. So as I mentioned, we compute these statistics based on what they call in the IPCC, or the International Panel for Climate Change, of Tier 1 default parameters. So these are parameters that are already provided in the guidelines, and other countries may use more refined methodologies and parameters to have more country-specific information. But our goal with our greenhouse gas emissions estimates is to have comparability across countries. And this is something that we're already in progress working on, is better understanding how our data compare to those more refined methodologies. So in our agro-environmental indicators that I'll show you in FAOSTAT, we touched already on the core environmental statistics that I mentioned, which are fertilizers, pesticides, and land use. We also have some other agro-environmental domains such as livestock patterns, land cover, and climate change. So for example, the land cover is a collaboration with the European Space Agency, in which we have, it's to complement our land use statistics, in which we are using geospatial data to have another reference data set for the distribution of the different land covers over country area. We also have some climate change relevant statistics, which I already mentioned for the greenhouse gas emissions. We also have a temperature change domain, which is in collaboration with NASA. And for this, we have annual temperature change data, which can be an important environmental driver. So I'll touch a little bit to show, for example, how our statistics can apply to the Sustainable Development Goals can also be an example of how can have applicability in terms of how the statistics can apply to other areas of interest that may arise. So for example, we have the SDG 15.1.1. So goal 15 of the Sustainable Development Goals is to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. So this is an example of one of the SDG targets. We have an indicator developed in our FAOSTAT domain, which is forest area as a proportion of total land area, which is directly relevant for the SDG 15.1.1. Another one of the Sustainable Development Goals is Goal 2, which is to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. And more specifically, there's a target 2.4.1, which is for which we have an indicator, which is the proportion of agricultural land under sustainable agriculture. And I'll touch more on this later in the presentation, because I'll show you how some other of our FAOSTAT statistics, in addition to average fertilizers used per area of cropland, for example, computed directly from FAOSTAT, a number of different other indicators that can be computed directly using FAOSTAT data that can be applicable to this target. Again, just showing how examples of our data can apply to different relevant international processes, I think also is applicable to how data users for the Datathon can use our data in specific challenges. So more specifically on the greenhouse gas emission statistics, we provide estimates for agricultural emissions from 1961 to 2017, including a land use component, which is from 1990 to 2017. This covers 185 countries. So in general, what you'll find in FAOSTAT is a good global coverage of our statistics. And this is one of the main things that we strive for, being in a UN organization and collecting data from all member countries, is to have data that is at the global level that can then be broken down to more refined levels. And why do I think this is also important for Datathon? Is so even with a focus on Europe, okay, I think it's also important to see how Europe is not its own standalone region. Of course, it also interacts with the rest of the world. So it can also be important to see how Europe compares to the global total, for example, or how one country in Europe compares to the rest of the world, or also things like Europe's contribution to the global total. All of these things can be easily calculated using the FAOSTAT statistics. So I already talked about a little bit about our Tier 1 methodology for the greenhouse gas emissions estimates. This is to facilitate national, regional, and global analysis, again, using default parameters that we think helps with comparison across countries and to make aggregations across countries. So here's a snapshot of our emissions database, which I'll also show you in more detail in FAOSTAT when I share the screen. Well, the screen is already shared, but when I open up the FAOSTAT website after the presentation. So, for example, we also calculate emissions intensities, which are basically emissions normalized by production of a given product. So for emissions from milk, for example, it would be dairy emissions normalized by the amount of milk that is produced. More specifically, on our climate change relevant statistics, we contribute to a number of different initiatives, including the UNECE task force. I already mentioned our FAOSTAT temperature change domain, which is a collaboration with NASA, which is now updated until 2019. We also have it's based on temperature change anomalies that are against a baseline data set, which is the 1950 to 1980 climatology. And we look at basically fluctuations in the current time frame against that baseline. So we also try and focus our communication to non-specialized users, which may or may not be data users like many of the participants are for the Datathon. And we try and do this with briefs that we develop for analytical briefs that we develop for when we disseminate our domains. So here's a snapshot, for example, of the temperature change domain in FAOSTAT, including one of the graphs that can be displayed in the data visualizations section of the FAOSTAT domain. So, as I mentioned, FAOSTAT statistics are useful to address a number of relevant issues in the agri-environment and climate change areas. We focus on a set of core environmental statistics, but we also develop analytical products that we hope can inform decision-making and inform other processes such as the Datathon. So I would like to spend a little bit more time on the more recent work that we've been doing on the Progress Towards Sustainable Agriculture report, which, as I mentioned, has been submitted, is going to be submitted soon for external peer review. For this, we developed a number of indicators using exclusively FAOSTAT data. Let me see if I can bring up the PDF easily. So here you can see a little bit better now what the actual indicators are. So the idea of this report was to focus on FAOSTAT statistics to see how they could be used as proxy indicators for the indicator 2.4.1, which, as I mentioned, is to feed into goal 2 of the Sustainable Development Goals. So 2.4.1 is more specifically the indicator itself for the Sustainable Development Goals is the proportion of agricultural land under sustainable agriculture, okay? And this is broken down into a few different themes, which I think can also show here how this information can be relevant to the different challenges, okay, for the Datathon. So for example, we have the environmental dimension, for which there are a number of different themes, and which should be quite applicable to challenge 1 for the Green New Deal. But we also have included in sustainable agriculture the economic dimension and the social dimension, which also the economic dimension, for example, could be quite applicable for the challenge 2, which is an economy that works for to be developed a total of 16 different indicators for this Progress Towards Sustainable Agriculture report, which touch on these different dimensions and themes. And all of these calculated using exclusively FAOSTAT data. Most of them are simply taking one data set from one domain as a numerator and another data set from a different domain as a denominator. So, for example, for productivity, we have a gross production value of crops and livestock per agricultural land. So in one of our FAOSTAT domains, we have gross production value of agriculture, okay? And in another one of our domains in our land use, we have agricultural land. So normalizing the gross production value over agricultural land can give you a first indicator for productivity. Likewise, for profitability, we have net production value of crops, and livestock, which is under the FAOSTAT website, and normalizing this by the number of agricultural workers, again, available in FAOSTAT, you can have a first indicator for a proxy for profitability. There are other indicators such as resilience, which might be especially also applicable to the social dimension here, where we have credit to agriculture, forestry, and fishing per rural population, which I think can be quite important in the social aspect. And we also have other indicators that we've produced, such as the Gini-Simpson's Index of gross production value of crops and livestock products. So in the social dimension, on the other hand, we have 3 different themes: decent deployment, food security, and land tenure. Land tenure, there's no current data available in FAOSTAT, but for example, for decent employment, again, another aspect that could be important for the social dimension, we have agriculture, forestry, and fishing value added, normalized by the number of agricultural workers. In the environmental dimension, we have a number of themes. So I already touched, for example, on the emissions, land use, pesticides and fertilizers, all of which are part of our core. So the land use, fertilizers and pesticides are part of our core environmental statistics, and emissions are part of our agri-environmental. And we come up with these proxy indicators for 2.4.1, but which are applicable in general in the environmental dimension, basically normalizing, for example, pesticides use in agriculture by area of cropland, or synthetic fertilizer use by area of cropland. Okay, so most of these are just normalizing data by either a land use indicator or producing a Gini-Simpson's index, for example, which is basically a dispersion or an inequality estimate of how crop production is spread across the different crops that are produced in a country. So I think that gives a good overview in terms of the presentation part. And then maybe now I can navigate directly to the FAOSTAT website. While it's loading, maybe I'll touch on one of the questions that probably the Datathon hosts will ask is in terms of access to the data to anticipate. So we used to have an API which would make the data quite easily accessible through a number of software. Right now, the easiest way to access the data while the API is being renewed is in terms of a bulk download. So for any of our data domains, so if I take land use, for example, the best way I think to download the data right now is in terms of a bulk download. So you can download here all of the data, and it will give you all of the data by country, by year, including a flag that will tell you more information on the data. Did it come directly from a questionnaire? Did it come from some other source? Or was it an estimate that was computed by FAO, by the Statistics Division? In each of the domains, for example, for land use, you can have, there's a visualized data section already where you can have some graphs to have a look at the global and also regional maps or trends, for example, of agricultural land. You can select Europe, which I think here is the regional Europe, which I think you're probably more interested in the EU. But if I select Europe, I think it also includes Russia in our aggregate, which from my understanding still hasn't joined the European Union. But I think you can also select European Union, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe you can only have Europe, so you might need to calculate the European Union aggregate yourself. For now, you can look at European Union plus Russia. So here there are some the data, and what did I want to show? And an important thing is in the definitions and standards. Clicking on this, you can see, like I was mentioning, more information about the flags, right? You can see what the data source is. Was it a FAO estimate? Did it come directly from a questionnaire? Or is it an aggregate? You can find information on more detailed information on the items. What are the actual definitions of agricultural land, for example? And usually in all of the domains, there's also a README domain information, which will give you more information on the methodologies that are applied for each of the domains. I also wanted to show you, for example, here, we have under the definitions and standards, we have our country group, the European Union, which is not Europe, including Russia, it's just the European Union. With all of the countries, our country codes, and all of the other, the other relevant codes for that country. So for example, if you want to take our FAOSTAT data and merge it with another data set, you can use this mapping from our FAOSTAT codes to the M49 or ISO 3 codes to merge the data sets to look at the data sets together, or merge information to compute indicators using more than one data set. So I think that's pretty much the bulk of my presentation. I don't know if we want to open it up for questions, or I can give a more detailed overview of FAOSTAT, for example. I mean, for now I touched on the the environmental statistics, but as you can see, I mean, I touched on the emissions, and most of the inputs are the environmental indicators as well as the agro-environmental indicators. But we have other domains, which, for example, the yield data that was used for one of the winners for last year's challenge used the crop production or the yield data from this domain. So for example, I mean, we have crop production data, we have livestock data, and different indices computed from the production as well as trade. This is our food balance domain. This is widely used for the state of food security publication that we produce, which measures and monitors the prevalence of undernourishment. So the food balance is, for example, give you an estimate of the food availability of in a country, as well as the different utilizations of agricultural products, including other utilizations such as animal feed or other utilizations. So I think, I mean, you can see, you can also go into the other different domains and have, for example, a look at producer prices, consumer prices, and some other different macro statistics. So I think that gives you a pretty good overview of FAOSTAT, how to access the data, how to merge the different data sets, and how to download the data, especially through the bulk download. If you want to specifically look at a specific country within Europe, you can select, for example, France. And whichever element you're interested in, such as yield. I think grapes is one of them, so maybe you're interested in grapes in France, and whichever year you're interested in, and that should give you some information on yield, production, and for grapes in France over time. Okay, So do we want to open it up for questions or?
Okay, Nathan?
Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We had a couple of questions. 1 second. Give me a second. One question is, how do you manage to collect the same data quality from so many different countries?
So our data goes through we have quality assurance and quality control. How do we ensure the quality, you asked, right?
Okay.
So we have do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So we have quality assurance and quality control procedures that are more or less domain specific, in which we take the data, we look at how the data compares to previously reported data, how the data compares to other data within the region, how the data compares with other sources, and these quality assurance and quality control measures we go through, including looking at plots by country, for example, and looking at differences with previously reported data, for example, and we go through and we go country by country to look at discrepancies, and when we can to reconcile these discrepancies. We also have an internal and external peer review process in which the data go up on our internal FAOSTAT domain, let's say, that's not accessible to external users, and it stays there for about a week. And we open up that domain for peer review to experts who provide us with comments and suggestions. And then after taking into account those comments and suggestions is when the data is finally disseminated on external FAOSTAT. Okay.
Inma, you're muted.
Yes, I just realized. Thank you. Another question is, how much knowledge is needed to use agricultural datasets without agricultural studies background?
So I think, for example, if you want to use land use data or crop production data without having an agricultural studies background, you may want to, for example, have a look at the first off the definitions. So if I go into agricultural land and I want to know if I'm downloading agricultural land, what does it actually mean? You can go into the definitions and standards and have a better idea of what data you're actually looking at. So if I go into agricultural land, then I can see, for example, what the different categories are, and then go into more detail by even looking at each of those individual categories to understand what does agricultural land actually mean. So I think for someone who's not with an agricultural background, they can have a look in any case at the definitions and understand from also a non-agricultural expert point of view what the data actually is. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And the final question is that some of the time series presented earlier in the presentation were updated until 2017, whereas for some presented later, there were datasets from 2019. They were available. Are they from different domains?
Yes. So some of our domains are have more recent data coverage, and that's basically an artifact of the data sources themselves. So for example, our core statistics are in general produced with about a 2-year time lag. So when they'll be updated this year, for example, the land use statistics will go until 2018. That will happen around July, August. So this is also in relation to, more specifically, the data collection processes of the countries themselves. These are often come from agricultural census data or other surveys that are conducted by the countries themselves, which come with some sort of lag in terms of reporting because of partly also the burden that it takes for the country to produce this data and to provide it to us
Okay, great. So okay, I think it's the end of the webinar. Thank you, Nathan, again for your time and for your presentation. I think can fit very well for not only European Green Deal, but also other challenges if you combine them. So we really invite the participants to go through it. And in case you have any questions, of course, you can ask us to our functional mailbox and we will try to help you as much as we can. I think this is the end. So take care. Submit your proposals before the 3rd of May and have a very nice weekend.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.